I always believed that love between a parent and a child was something unbreakable, not unshakable. I've seen tempers flare, doors slam, silence stretch for days, but unbreakable in the way a river twists and bends yet never stops flowing. I was wrong. Sometimes the river dries up, not from exhaustion, but because someone decides to build a dam. Her name is Claire, my daughter, my only child. When she was born, I was 33, old enough to understand responsibility, young enough to believe I could get it right. I remember the weight of her in my arms, the small warmth against my chest, her eyes barely open but searching, somehow already knowing who I was. The hospital light caught her hair, and something in me swore silently that I'd never let anything hurt her. Promises are fragile things. They sound eternal when you whisper them to a newborn. They start to fade when life begins to speak louder. Her mother, Julia, and I were together for 13 years before it all began to rot quietly under the surface. There was no affair, no shouting match, just a slow cooling. Two people moving in parallel hallways of the same house, brushing past each other like polite strangers. I buried myself in work, convincing myself it was sacrifice. She buried herself in routines that no longer included me. When Claire turned 11, Julia filed for divorce. She said the word like it was mercy, not a verdict. I agreed because I was tired, not of them, but of the constant pretending that things were fine. Julia got primary custody. I told myself it was best for Claire. Same school, same bedroom, same friends. Stability. I kept my apartment 15 minutes away, the kind of place meant for temporary living, but that ends up swallowing years. Every other weekend, I'd pick Claire up. We had our rituals, the park by the river, the tiny Italian restaurant where she'd order spaghetti and eat it like it was an Olympic event. I'd laugh, she'd grin, and for a few hours, we'd feel like the word family still meant something. But little by little, the weekends shortened. She started saying things like, "Mom says you never really wanted this life," or "Mom said you were happier now that we're not around." Each time, I'd try to explain, not defensively, but gently, like a man afraid of raising his voice near something delicate. Still, words can't compete with daily presence. Julia's voice filled every weekday. Mine visited twice a month. By 16, Claire stopped calling me Dad. It was just Daniel now. Clean, polite, final. That's when I realized the quiet between us wasn't temporary. It was becoming permanent. I didn't blame her. She believed what she saw. I was the man who arrived, smiled too hard, bought gifts that tried too hard, and left before Sunday night ended. A cameo in her story. When she went to college, even those brief appearances disappeared. Messages from me went unanswered or met with single-word replies. Thanks. Okay. Busy. I told myself she'd circle back someday. After all, every child grows curious about the truth eventually. But years have a cruel way of turning someday into never. Every birthday, I mailed her a handwritten card. It wasn't for her anymore. It was for me. A small act of resistance against being erased. Sometimes I wondered if she even opened them, or if the envelope went straight into the trash. Still, I wrote, because habit is a kind of hope you perform when you've run out of reasons. 10 years slipped by like that, quiet, uneventful, lonely. Through social media, I watched her life unfold as if through a window. Graduation, new job, a golden retriever, and a man who began to appear beside her in photos. Mark. He looked solid, kind. Seeing her happy should have been enough, and maybe for a while it was. Pride is strange like that. It doesn't ask for permission to exist, even when you've been excluded from the story. Then, one evening, a message arrived from Julia. We hadn't spoken in almost a decade. "Claire's getting married in June. Thought you should know." No invitation, no contact, just that line. A bullet without sound. I must have read it a dozen times, looking for something beneath the coldness. A comma that hinted at warmth, a word that suggested I was still part of that world. But it was clean, surgical, Final. For days, I slept little, ate less. My mind kept painting the day I would not see. The aisle, the music, the man waiting at the end. I tried to picture who would walk beside her. Maybe Julia's new husband, maybe an uncle, someone who hadn't earned it but would wear the moment like a borrowed suit. That image hollowed me out. It wasn't vanity, it was grief in its purest form. A lifetime of small fatherly moments meant to culminate in one slow walk, one handoff, one silent blessing. And now it was gone. I didn't call, I didn't write back. There's a stage of pain where anger burns itself out, and what remains is just a dull weight pressing on your chest. That's where I lived for weeks, among memories, half-drunk coffee cups, and the sound of a phone that stayed silent. But under the heaviness, something began to stir. Not vengeance, that wasn't in me anymore. Just a need. To be seen, to exist in the moment she'd spent her whole life walking toward. Not to disrupt it, not to ruin it, but to remind both of us that I was still her father. And fathers, no matter how forgotten, do not vanish. In the weeks after that message, time didn't move the way it used to. Days stretched long and meaningless, while nights closed in fast, thick with silence. I stopped checking my phone, because nothing new ever came. No follow-up message, no invitation. Just the echo of what wasn't said. I went to work, came home, made dinner I rarely finished. My apartment felt smaller than usual, like the air itself had turned inward. And every time I tried to push the thought away, her wedding, it found a new way to return. Not as a question, but as a quiet ache. I started remembering small things. The first time she rode a bike, the way she cried when she fell. How she refused to let me hold the handle the next time because I can do it myself, Daddy. It wasn't about the bike, even then. It was about independence, something she seemed born to chase. Maybe that's why losing her hurt so deeply. She didn't drift away by accident. She chose distance. She built it brick by brick until it became a wall I couldn't climb anymore. One night, I opened an old box in my closet, full of photos I hadn't looked at in years. Claire's school drawings, a birthday card that said #1 Dad in uneven handwriting, a tiny handprint from kindergarten pressed into plaster. I sat there for hours, surrounded by ghosts that didn't even know they were dead. That's when it happened. Not a sudden idea, more like something that rose quietly out of the stillness. If she wouldn't invite me, maybe I didn't need an invitation. Maybe all I needed was presence. The thought scared me at first. What would I even do? Just show up? Would it make things worse? Embarrass her? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't about embarrassment or ego. It was about closure, about walking the last few steps of a promise I'd once made. One last gesture before letting go. I didn't want to cause a scene. I didn't want to ruin her day. I just wanted to see her in that moment, even from the back of the room, even unseen. Because every father dreams of walking his daughter down the aisle. And some dreams refuse to die quietly. So I started to plan, not impulsively, but methodically, like I used to when preparing for a big project at work. I didn't tell anyone, not friends, not coworkers. Some things are too sacred for casual conversation. Julia still lived in the same city as me, and Claire's wedding was scheduled in late June at a vineyard just outside town. I learned that much from social media. People post everything, even the things they think are private. A tagged location, a photo of an engagement ring, a rehearsal dinner post. All breadcrumbs, leading straight to the day I wasn't supposed to attend. The morning of the wedding came quiet and gray. I woke before dawn, showered, shaved, and stood in front of the mirror for a long time. I didn't recognize myself completely. Not the hair streaked with gray, not the eyes that seemed permanently tired. But beneath all that, the man who once held her on the day she was born was still there. I put on my best suit, navy blue, the one I'd worn only once before, to my own father's funeral. The irony wasn't lost on me. Tucked inside the jacket pocket, I placed a folded letter, the kind that would never be sent, only read once, by me, in silence. As I drove toward the vineyard, the world outside looked both painfully ordinary and impossibly far away. Traffic lights, billboards, families heading somewhere, all moving forward while I seemed trapped in a memory I couldn't escape. When I arrived, the parking lot was already full. Cars lined the gravel road leading up to the venue. I parked far from the entrance, where the trees cast long shadows and the sound of laughter carried faintly in the distance. The air smelled like summer, warm grass, perfume, and something faintly floral. I walked slowly, keeping to the edges, blending into the background the way old men do when they no longer belong. The ceremony was being held outdoors, rows of white chairs facing an arch draped with flowers. Guests were— I respected him for that. Even in that moment, I found no resentment toward him. Just a quiet gratitude that he'd see her through the things I couldn't. Then came the moment, the one every wedding builds toward. The procession began. The bridesmaids, then the flower girl, and finally, Claire. But something strange happened. She hesitated at the end of the aisle. For a second, she looked around, not lost, but searching. And in that small, uncertain glance, I saw the same little girl who once turned to me after falling off her bike, eyes wet, waiting for help she didn't want to ask for. And that was when I moved. I don't know what possessed me, instinct, memory, love, or something in between. But before I realized it, I was walking toward her, each step deliberate, calm, as if rehearsed by the years themselves. People turned, whispers rising like wind in dry grass. Julia's voice, sharp, panicked, called my name, but I didn't stop. Claire saw me then. Shock first, then confusion, then something else, something raw, unguarded, like recognition after a long dream. I stopped beside her, keeping my voice low, steady. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. "You forgot your escort." She didn't answer at first. The music had stopped. The guests had turned. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. Then, after a moment that felt like a lifetime, she nodded, just once. And without a word, she slipped her arm through mine. I used to think there were certain things in life that could never break. The bond between a father and his daughter was one of them. When she was little, she used to grab my finger with her whole hand, tugging me toward the park, toward life, toward everything new. Back then, the world was simple. My mornings began with her laughter echoing down the hallway, and my nights ended with the sound of her breathing softly against my chest as she fell asleep during bedtime stories. I never imagined those small hands would one day push me away. It started with silence. The kind of silence that seeps in slowly. One missed phone call, one unanswered message, one holiday where the seat beside you stays empty. At first, I told myself she was busy. Work, life, youth. I made excuses for her because that's what fathers do. We shield our children from blame, even when it hurts us. But deep down, I could feel it. The distance wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. She had grown up, and somewhere in that process, I had become a chapter she didn't want to reread. The day I found out about her wedding, I wasn't told. I wasn't called. I wasn't invited. I heard it from a neighbor, an old woman who still read the local announcements out loud at the grocery store. She said, "You must be so proud, Tom. Your daughter's getting married next month." I smiled, out of habit, then nodded, because that's what you do when your throat closes. I thanked her, bought my groceries, and drove home in silence. That night, I sat in my chair by the window, the one where I used to rock her to sleep when she was sick, and stared at the moon. I kept asking myself what I had done wrong. Was it the divorce, the distance, the years I spent trying to keep a roof over our heads instead of attending every school play? Or maybe it was that I never learned how to talk about feelings, how to say "I love you" without making it awkward. When she was 12, she once asked me, "Dad, "Do you ever miss Mom?" I told her, "I miss the family we were." She didn't respond. I think that's when she started missing me too, even while I was still there. I saw her wedding photos online a few days later. Her smile was bright, her eyes alive. The man beside her looked decent, the kind who probably opens doors and remembers anniversaries. She looked happy, and that hurt the most, because she looked complete, without me. But there was one photo that broke me completely. It was her walking down the aisle. On her arm was a man I didn't recognize. Older, confident, with that rehearsed smile of someone who believes he belongs. He wasn't her stepfather. She'd never had one. He was a stranger. But in that photo, he looked like me. Not by blood, but by the way he walked beside her. Proud, steady, protective. That image carved something open inside me. Not jealousy, not anger, just an unbearable sadness, the kind that sits in your chest and refuses to move. For days, I told myself to forget, but grief doesn't fade quietly. It turns into something else: reflection, understanding, and eventually, resolve. A week after the wedding, I received a letter in the mail. Not from her, but from my late ex-wife's sister. Inside was a photo of my daughter in her dress and a small note that read, "She looked beautiful, Tom. She missed you. She just didn't know how to face you." I must have stared at that line 100 times. She just didn't know how to face you. Something inside me shifted then. Not anger, not regret, just a quiet acceptance that love, even when broken, still deserves a goodbye. So I decided to give her one. Not by calling, not by confronting, but by showing up, one last time, to remind her that no matter how far she ran, I was still there. Not as a guest, not as an intruder, but as her father. And so, on a cool Saturday morning, 2 weeks after her wedding, I put on the same old suit I wore to her high school graduation, held the letter in my pocket, and drove to the church, where her new life had already begun. Not to take anything back, not to be seen, just to walk her down the aisle, one last time, in my own way. I arrived an hour early. The church was quiet, too quiet for what it had witnessed days ago. The flowers had wilted, the ribbons had loosened, and the confetti still clung to the cracks between the stones like the memory of laughter that refused to fade. It felt strange standing there, on those same steps where my daughter had once stood, radiant and loved, while I sat miles away trying to convince myself it didn't matter. I parked across the street and just looked. The world moved on as if nothing had happened, but I could still feel her presence in the air. The way she must have smiled nervously before the doors opened, the way her hands must have trembled as she held her bouquet, and the way another man's arm must have steadied her. The wind carried faint traces of flowers and perfume, and for a moment I imagined her voice again, calling out, "Dad, are you coming?" That illusion was enough to bring tears to my eyes. I hadn't cried at the funeral of my father. I hadn't cried when my marriage ended. But standing there, alone, on the steps where I should have been standing beside her, I broke. I let the tears fall, quietly, like everything else I've ever done. After a while, I stepped inside. The doors creaked, a sound that used to make her laugh when she was small. She'd mimic the sound and pretend to be a ghost every time we visited old churches on road trips. "Boo, Daddy," she'd giggle. I used to scoop her up and tell her that ghosts weren't real. I was wrong. Some ghosts aren't dead. They're memories that never stop walking beside you. The aisle stretched ahead of me, long and empty now. The sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, painting the pews in colors of red and gold. I walked slowly, counting each step like it mattered. Each step was a year. Year 1, the year she learned to walk. Year 5, her first day at school. Year 10, the year I taught her to ride a bike. Year 16, the year she slammed her bedroom door and said she hated me. Year 18,
the year she left for college and stopped calling. And year 30, the year she got married without me. By the time I reached the altar, my legs were trembling. Not from age, from memory. I looked around, trying to imagine where everyone must have sat. The guests, the groom, her friends, and her. I pictured her walking down this very path, her dress brushing against the floor, her eyes locked on a future that no longer included me. I didn't blame her. Not anymore. I sat in the front pew and took out the photo her aunt had sent me. I held it gently, as though it might crumble if I breathed too hard. Her smile. God, that smile. It was the same one she had when she used to run into my arms after school, shouting, "Daddy!" For years, I'd convinced myself that fatherhood was about providing, about keeping the lights on, the fridge full, the bills paid. But sitting there, I realized something cruelly simple. It was never about the things I gave her. It was about the moments I didn't. The stories I never told. The apologies I never voiced. The hugs I withheld because I thought she'd outgrown them. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and whispered to the empty air, "I'm sorry, sweetheart, for not knowing how to love you the way you needed." The church was silent, but it felt like it was listening. Then I heard footsteps, faint, cautious. I turned. A woman stood by the door, holding a broom. The caretaker, maybe? She looked at me with polite confusion, the way people look at strangers who've wandered into their private places. "Sir, are you looking for someone?" she asked. I smiled faintly. "No, I'm just visiting." Her gaze.
The woman smiled gently. "She's a good girl, your daughter. She just needed time." I nodded, unable to speak. Then she left me alone again with the echo of her words. When I finally rose to leave, I walked down that aisle slowly, the same way she must have walked days ago. Only this time, in my mind, I wasn't alone. I imagined her beside me, her arm hooked through mine, her head leaning lightly against my shoulder like she used to when she was small. We walked together, step by step, through memory and forgiveness. At the end of the aisle, I whispered, "I'm here now, sweetheart. I walked you down, just like I promised." And for the first time in years, I felt peace. Not the kind that erases pain, the kind that coexists with it. When I stepped outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the faint echo of church bells. I looked back one last time, smiled, and walked away, not as a forgotten father, but as a man who finally let go. I didn't go straight home after leaving the church. I drove without direction, through streets I didn't recognize, past people who looked like they had somewhere to be. I envied them. There's comfort and purpose in having a place where you belong. For years, I told myself my purpose was to be a father. Now, even that word felt borrowed, like a title I used to hold but had quietly expired. The sun began to set, casting long orange streaks across the road. I stopped at a diner, somewhere off the highway, one of those forgotten places that still smelled like burnt coffee and cigarettes from decades past. The waitress smiled politely, poured me a cup, and didn't ask questions. Maybe she saw something in my face that told her not to. I sat in the corner booth, my reflection staring back at me through the window. A man with tired eyes and a kind of grief that doesn't demand attention, only understanding. That's when I pulled out the old leather notebook I used to keep in my jacket pocket. It had followed me everywhere, through boardrooms, birthdays, and breakdowns. Half the pages were filled with half-finished thoughts, but tonight I wanted to finish one. I opened to a blank page, took a breath, and began to write. Dear Claire, I don't know if this letter will ever reach you. Maybe it'll stay tucked between these pages forever, or maybe one day curiosity will bring you to it. Either way, it doesn't matter. I just need to say these things, not for you to hear them, but for me to finally let them go. When you were born, I thought love was easy. I thought it was something you simply felt, and that feeling was enough. But I learned that love is work, quiet, unglamorous work that no one teaches you how to do. I wasn't good at it. I gave you things, but not time. I gave you advice, but not understanding. And when life demanded patience, I gave silence instead. You didn't deserve that. The truth is, I wasn't angry when you didn't invite me to your wedding. I was ashamed. Ashamed that I had built a life so busy proving my worth that I forgot to give you the one thing you always needed: presence. You saw me as distant, and you weren't wrong. I was a man chasing security while losing sight of what it was for. I don't blame you for believing the stories told in my absence. Maybe I would have believed them too if I were you. You were just a little girl trying to make sense of a father who kept disappearing behind excuses. But I never stopped loving you, Claire, not for a second. You were my first thought every morning and my last before sleep. Every promotion I ever took, every move I made, every time I swallowed my pride and smiled through loneliness, it was always for you. I just never learned how to show it in a way that mattered. When I stood in that empty church today, I didn't see what I'd lost. I saw what I'd failed to protect. The little girl who once trusted me to keep her safe from everything, even her own fears. I wish I could have been the man who deserved to walk beside her that day. But in my mind, I did, and that's enough for me. If you ever find this letter, don't feel guilty. Don't carry the weight of my mistakes. You owe the world your happiness, the kind I once dreamed you'd find, the kind I hope you have now. I'm proud of you, sweetheart, more than you'll ever know. Love, always, Dad. I stared at the letter for a long time after finishing it. My hands were trembling, not from age, but from the release of something that had been sitting too heavy for too long. I didn't read it twice. I didn't correct the messy handwriting or the smudges from my tears. It was imperfect, like me, like us. When I folded it and slipped it into the back pocket of my notebook, I felt something unfamiliar: lightness. I paid for the coffee and stepped outside. The air was cooler now. The stars had begun to show, faint, scattered, like memories too distant to fully see, but still enough to guide your way home. On the way back, I stopped by the post office. It was closed, of course, but I didn't intend to mail the letter. I just wanted to stand there, outside the place where countless words have been sent out into the world, most of them never read the way they were meant to be. I tore a scrap from my notebook and wrote a small note on the envelope. For Claire, someday. Then I placed it in the slot and let it go. Weeks passed. I didn't expect a response. None came. But the silence didn't hurt the same anymore. It was no longer a punishment. It was simply a space where love used to echo. I went back to my ordinary life: morning walks, old records, the occasional visit to the park where she once fed ducks as a child. Sometimes I'd sit on the same bench we used to share and read a book I knew she'd never finish. And when the wind rustled the pages, I liked to imagine it was her, teasing me for reading the ending first. Then, one afternoon, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived. The handwriting was neat, unfamiliar. The return address, her city. I held it for nearly an hour before opening it, afraid that whatever was inside might break the fragile peace I'd built. Finally, I unfolded it. "Dad," it began, "I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I heard from Aunt Lisa that you visited the church. I wish I'd known. I wish I'd seen you. I cried that morning too, you know. I told Mom I wanted to call you, but she said it would make things complicated. Maybe she was right. Maybe not. But I wanted you to know. I thought about you. A lot. Especially when I walked down the aisle. It didn't feel right. It felt incomplete. Like someone was missing. You. I don't know if I can fix the past, but if you're open to it, maybe we can start with coffee. Love, Claire." The words blurred through my tears. Not from grief this time, but from something gentler, healing. I read it again and again, and for the first time in years, the ache inside me didn't feel endless. It felt like the beginning of something new, fragile, uncertain, but real.
I smiled, folded the letter carefully, and whispered to the quiet room, "I'll be there, sweetheart. I'll be there."
The day we agreed to meet, I woke before sunrise. I didn't sleep much the night before, not from nerves, but from the quiet disbelief that it was actually happening. There's a strange weight to waiting for something you once thought would never come. It's not excitement. It's more like standing at the edge of a familiar river, wondering if it still remembers your name. The letter said noon. The Willow Cafe, downtown, she'd written, a place I'd never heard of. I looked it up online. Small, modest, tucked between a florist and a bookstore. Something about that seemed fitting. Life blooming on one side, stories on the other. Between them, maybe, a chance at something in between. I must have arrived 40 minutes early. Old habits, I guess. The instinct to be prepared for moments that don't have do-overs. The cafe was warm, quiet. Wooden floors, soft yellow light, the smell of cinnamon and coffee beans. A young barista asked what I'd like. I said I'd wait to order. "Meeting someone," I murmured. He smiled, the kind of polite smile that belongs to people too young to know what waiting like this feels like. I picked a corner seat facing the door. The window beside me caught the reflection of people passing by. Mothers with strollers, couples with laughter, friends sharing secrets over coffee. I used to watch Claire in that same way when she was little, just being, existing in a world that hadn't yet broken her trust. She'd once said, "Dad, do you think love stays the same when people grow up?" I told her yes. I lied. Because the truth is, love changes shape. Sometimes it becomes quiet, sometimes it hides, and sometimes, if you're lucky, it finds its way back, different but still recognizable. When she finally walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked older, of course, more polished, confident. But it wasn't just that. She carried herself like someone who'd learned how to live without needing anyone's permission. There was grace in her movements, but also something fragile beneath it, like porcelain that had once cracked and been glued carefully back together. She spotted me almost immediately. Her steps faltered, just slightly, before she smiled. A small, uncertain smile that looked more like a memory than a greeting. "Hi," she said. Her voice. It had changed too, softer but steadier. I stood, managed a small nod. "Hi, Claire." For a moment, neither of us moved. The cafe around us carried on, cups clinking, conversations blending into background noise. It was as if the world had decided to give us privacy, even in public. She sat across from me. The space between us felt heavy, but not hostile, just full. Years of silence condensed into that one small table. "You look good," she said finally. I smiled faintly. "You too. Married life suits you?" She gave a nervous laugh. "I guess so. Still learning how to share closet space." I chuckled quietly, and something inside me eased. It wasn't the kind of laughter that fixes things, but the kind that lets you breathe again after forgetting how. We ordered coffee. She went for a caramel latte, her favorite when she was 16. I remembered that. I didn't tell her. Some things are better kept quiet, like small proofs of love that don't need to be announced. When the drinks arrived, we both stared at them longer than we drank. Finally, she spoke. "I didn't mean to shut you out, Dad." It was the first time she'd called me that in almost 20 years. The word hit me like a chord I hadn't heard in so long that I forgot how much I missed its sound. I kept my voice steady. "I know. You were protecting yourself. And, maybe, protecting her." She looked down. Mom had her version of things. I believed her because it was easier than asking questions that hurt. "I understand," I said softly. "She did what she thought was right. We both did. We just forgot that right looks different depending on where you're standing." She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I used to think you didn't care, that you just moved on." I shook my head. "No, Claire, I never moved on. I just moved quietly." Her lip trembled. "When I saw your name on the RSVP list, I panicked. I told Mom I didn't want drama. But the truth is, I was scared you wouldn't come even if I invited you. I smiled faintly. And I was scared you wouldn't want me there even if you did. We sat there, two people who had built entire lives on misunderstandings, now carefully taking them apart, one word at a time. After a while, she said, "Aunt Lisa gave me your letter." I froze. "I thought you might have seen it," I murmured. "Wasn't meant to be found." "Well, I did," she said, voice trembling, "and I cried all night after reading it." I swallowed hard. "Then maybe it found you exactly when it was supposed to." She reached across the table. Her hand hesitated in midair, then rested gently on mine. "I'm sorry, Dad." The word sorry has a strange power. It doesn't erase, but it softens. I turned my palm over and held her hand. The same hand I'd once held crossing the street, now grown and steady. "I'm sorry, too," I whispered. We sat like that for a long time. No words, no explanations. Just the quiet rhythm of forgiveness settling into the space between us. When we finally let go, I noticed something. Her wedding ring caught the light. Gold, simple, elegant. It reminded me of the promise I'd once made her mother. For a moment, I felt an ache for all the things that hadn't lasted. But then I realized this moment was enough. Some promises may break, but love finds its way through the cracks. As we finished our coffee, she smiled through tears. "Can we try again? Not like before. Just start fresh?" I nodded, voice thick. We never stopped, Claire. We were just on pause. Outside, the sun had begun to set again, much like the day I wrote her letter. But this time, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like dusk before a new morning. Soft, forgiving, infinite. Before we parted, she leaned in and hugged me. It wasn't long. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. "I missed you," she whispered.